Hi, everybody, and welcome to our next speaker here, Steve McConnell. He's here to talk about how to take charge of your career in software. You probably know Steve because he is the well-known author of Code Complete. It's a software industry classic and is one of the best reviewed, best-selling software development books of all time. Steve has sold more than 1 million copies, and this book has some of his books have been translated into more than 20 languages. His most recent book, if you haven't checked it out yet, is More Effective Agile, a roadmap for software leaders. I also want to just highlight that Steve was named one of the most influential people in the software industry, along with Bill Gates and Linus Torvalds in 1998. And in 2019, the Forbes Technology Council named Code Complete the single best cornerstone book on good software development. So seriously, if you haven't checked it out, you really should. Steve, what was one of your favorite jobs in your career? I know you're going to talk about that a little bit today, but what have you enjoyed most in what you've done?
Well, obviously, my favorite is this talk today. So, really looking forward to that. I think one of the great things about being in software is that it's given me the opportunity to see all kinds of different, just crazy kinds of applications that you would never have imagined software would help with, but that it actually either helps a lot or completely transforms the way the work is done. So in the role that I've had as a consultant author over the years, I've gotten to see lots and lots of different companies, and that variety has just been really inspiring.
So much creativity and innovation out there, right?
Yeah.
Well, with hopefully no more delay, let's go ahead and hear from Steve about how to take charge of your career in software.
Oh, thanks, Alexa. Thanks for joining me today for this talk on how to take charge of your career in software. I want to go through a handful of things with you today. I want to spend some time talking about my personal professional development story because that really is kind of what my structured approach is based on. And then I want to spend some time talking about that approach to supporting software professional development for other software professionals and talk about how you can use my story to your benefit. Diving right in, I guess I should start by saying, why should you pay any attention to me as someone talking about career development or how to take charge of your career? I've had a variety of roles over the years in addition to just my own career. I was chair of the IEEE Professional Activities Board, which is an organization that oversees university curriculum guidelines, accreditation standards, certification, and other activities like that. I wrote a book a long time ago called Professional Software Development that kind of outlined one view of what professional development would look like. My views have actually evolved quite a bit since that book was published, and I'll be sharing more of that with you today. And I think maybe relevant to today's talk, I'm the primary author of my company's Professional Development Ladder, or PDL, which is a structured approach to career development. We'll talk about that a little bit toward the end of the talk. So my personal professional development story looks like this. I feel like I went through about 4 phases in my career, starting with initially having really what I viewed as a job, then moving into an occupation, moving into treating it more as a profession, and finally moving into more of a sustaining, ongoing growth approach that I think of as professional development. And the details look kind of like this. I think when I had a job, I really just worked. I went into the office, I did my job, I went home. I didn't really think about it a whole lot other than just being there and doing the tasks. After a couple of years of that, I really started thinking of it more as an occupation that I wanted to do. Initially, I wasn't really that committed to the field, but eventually I got to the point where I thought, okay, if I'm going to do this, I should probably figure out how to do it well. So I started going to user group meetings. I had one friend who actually was pretty interested in software development as a career. I had more friends who were doing it, but only one who was really interested in it. So he and I would go to user group meetings. I started attending training, but really on company time. So it wasn't something I wanted to do in my free time. It was more something I would do only if the company supported it. So that lasted for a couple years as well. And then in the third phase, the profession phase, I started reading a lot about software development. And the key shift here was that I was doing it on my own time. It was something that I had become interested in and invested in. So I wasn't really looking just to my company anymore to support that. It was something I wanted to do for myself. I joined the IEEE Computer Society, which is the largest organization of software professionals worldwide. I got a master's degree in software engineering, and I wrote my first book. Now, you would think out of this that maybe the big watershed event here would be getting my master's degree, and that would be a natural thing to think. Or you might think that maybe the first step of starting to read a lot about software development on my own time was the big step. But for me personally, the really big step was joining the IEEE Computer Society, because in getting the magazine I developed an awareness that I was affiliating with other people who actually cared about software, who cared about doing it better, cared about learning it. And so that sense of community and that sense of affiliation was really the big change for me, was starting to feel like I was part of something larger than myself. And that helped give me a sense of purpose and meaning in my work. And that was really what energized me about doing the rest of this stuff, including getting the master's degree and writing my first book. And then the last stage, professional development, that was really about me deciding who I wanted to be in the software field and creating a plan to do that. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. So the first thing I did to really kind of chart my course, and somehow I managed to save this piece of paper from 1989, but I went through kind of a personal visioning exercise where I defined my ideal work experience. And this was about 4 years out of college for me. And as I look at this today, this actually, even 30 plus years later, pretty much reflects what I want to do now. So I think this was actually pretty good as a vision statement. It's lasted a long time, but I wanted to work on both long and short-term projects. I wanted analytical tasks. I wanted to do some planning and organizing. I wanted my own office with comfortable furniture, chairs, desk, stereo, bookshelves, etc. I wanted an office suite shared with genuine friends, so people I really wanted to work with. I wanted to work on something recognized as excellent. I wanted to work close to home, and ideally in a smaller town or suburb. And then I wanted to travel occasionally. And I see I misspelled the word occasionally, which is funny because I could never remember how to spell that. When I wrote Code Complete, my first book, one of my goals for writing the book was to master the spelling of occasionally once and for all, which I did. But I wanted to travel 3 to 6 times a year or something like that. I wanted to create something that contributed to social good. I wanted to be my own boss. I wanted to profit or loss as a result of my labor. So I wanted to, if I did well, I wanted to feel that. If I didn't do well, I wanted to feel that too. I wanted to be an expert in my field. I didn't want to do a lot of clerical or redundant work. I wanted to work with smart people. I wanted there to be some room for creativity. So like I said, I think this list still looks pretty good to me today. I might fine tune it a little bit, but at least 80% of it still reflects where I am 30 years later. So this personal visioning exercise, I think, was quite useful. And what I had noticed was that, and I think this is true for others as well, that my career up to that point had kind of just been lily pad hopping from one project to the next or one technology to the next. My career consisted of, I worked on this project and I learned this programming language. I worked on the next project, I learned the next programming language, but it didn't really feel like it was going anywhere. And so if I was going to lily pad hop, I at least wanted there to be a plan to the lily pad hopping. And I believe that if I came up with some kind of a plan, that good things would happen. And I didn't really know that, but that's how I felt. And so I thought that's what I needed to do. So the first really kind of serious thing I did, so this is about 2 years later than the visioning exercise, and then now it's about 6 years out of college, I created this thing that I thought of as the professional reputation pyramid. And I hadn't seen this anywhere. I just made it up on my own. I didn't know if there was really any value to it, but that's what I did. And so this is the actual piece of paper. Well, it's not. It's the picture of the actual piece of paper. What this looked like was this. I kind of just divided up the world of software development in the United States and figured at the time there were about 1 million professionals. Now it might have been 2 million, but 1 million in round numbers was about the right number. And I figured that was basically all programmers at the time. And then I just went by powers of 10. So I figured, well, how do you narrow that down? What would 100,000 people look like? What would characterize those people? I figured these are the people of professional organizations, and the IEEE Computer Society had about that many members at the time. So I figured, okay, so highly competent is about 10% of the total population. Moving up the pyramid to the next power of 10, 10,000 people, I figured, okay, well, these are people who have a PhD in computer science or maybe a master's degree in software engineering. Next level up, I figured people who have published articles. So these are people who are really serious about the field, really committed. So they published articles in software engineering or a single book in computer science. And then the next level up of 100 people, now we're getting to a little bit less, quite a bit less common. These are people who have published books in software engineering or many articles. And then at this level, I felt like the number of people that were in this category were small enough that I knew who a lot of them were. And so I had specific names of people that I wrote down as my exemplars of people who I thought were at that level. And then the next level, I felt like these were the people who had a lifetime achievement of major contributions to the field of software engineering. So they'd been director of a major software engineering research center, or they'd written more than one classic book. So not just one classic book, or not just more than one book, but more than one classic book. And then I had some names of people here too. And then at the very, very top, I didn't think there was really any specific person in software that I could identify that I could convince myself was the one person at the top. So I went to the field of management and looked at Peter Drucker, who I always thought was the guy. He was the tippy top of the field at the time in the general management space. So I thought, okay, the one person, the professional reputation pyramid looks like this. Now, I had my personal vision for what I wanted. This gave me a little bit of direction in terms of more specific direction in terms of career development. I figured the first thing I needed to do was identify where I was on the pyramid and then think about where I wanted to go. And at the time I created the pyramid, I was here. I had finished my master's degree in software engineering, so I felt like I was kind of in the 1 out of 10,000 category. So what to do next? Well, I decided to write my first book, and part of the reason for that was to move up the professional reputation pyramid. But I have a really important life rule, which is I never do anything big for just one reason. I want to have multiple reasons for anything big, so that if whatever one of the reasons doesn't work out, then one of the other reasons will still make it a good enough idea to have done. And moving up the pyramid was not the main reason that I wanted to write a book. I had several reasons for wanting to write Code Complete, and in order, they look like this. Number one, I thought programmers needed the book, so I wanted to make a difference. That tapped into my sense of purpose, my sense of meaning, so that was really the number one goal for me. Number two is I wanted to create essentially like a really big, heavy business card that I could hand to people that would allow me to just talk to the other people who were as interested in this subject as I was. And I figured if I write a decent, workmanlike book that's respectable, then other people will know I care about the field and they'll be willing to talk to me. Number three, I wanted the experience of writing a book. Number four, I wanted to sell some copies. And then tied for four, I wanted to create a consulting credential. I thought if I wrote a book, maybe I could increase my consulting rates. And tied for number four was to move up the professional reputation pyramid. So it wasn't exactly last, but it was in a three-way tie for last place. Now, one of the reasons I don't like to do anything big for only one reason is you can't always control the outcome. And so out of my reasons for writing Code Complete, could I guarantee that I could sell some copies? No, not really. I could do as good a job as possible, but that doesn't necessarily mean it would work out in terms of sales. Was I going to move up the professional reputation pyramid? Well, again, if the book wasn't well received, maybe that wouldn't work. Likewise, could I make a difference with programmers? Well, if it didn't sell very well, then it wasn't going to make a difference with programmers. So I didn't really have control over those reasons. However, I could guarantee that I could have the experience of writing a book, so that was a sure thing. I could also know that I had a calling card. I could control whether I did a good job on it, and so that was something I could guarantee. And I thought it would pretty certainly give me a consulting credential. which again, if I did a good job, that would help me at least at a local individual level. So overall, I concluded this was a good enough set of reasons to take on the project of writing the book, which was a major project for me. I spent almost 4 years end to end working on Code Complete. I spent a year and a half doing background research and collecting notes and writing outlines and samples. I spent a year working on it full time, and then I spent another half a year, or more like 3/4 of a year, kind of going through the editing process, which was another 500 hours. It was an insane amount of time. So it was a really long time. I spent as much time working on Code Complete as I spent in college. So pretty major project overall, but I think it worked out. So 1991 through 93, I wrote Code Complete. And what I would say is that I got some benefits I wasn't expecting from writing Code Complete. The main one was that I feel like I learned as much during the 1 year I spent writing Code Complete full time as during any 3 years that I had spent programming professionally up to that point. So the amount of learning was terrific. Now that said, once I was done writing it, I was really glad to get back to programming. I'd had enough of writing. I really felt like I was writing about the thing I love doing rather than doing the thing I love doing. And so I was quite happy to get back to programming. And what I eventually saw after a couple more cycles of this was that I repeated that cycle with my second book. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But first, let's go back to that professional reputation pyramid. And so I had felt like at the beginning of Code Complete, I was in this 10,000 person category. After publishing the book, I felt like I had moved up. So I'd moved up into the 1,000 person category. I'd published a book in software engineering. So I felt like, in fact, I had accomplished the goal by the time I was done of moving up the professional reputation pyramid a little bit. But by this time, I had decided, okay, I actually really am serious about the field, and I wasn't 100% sure I was at the beginning of all this. But by now I said, okay, fine. I actually do want to try to move up the pyramid, and I really would like to figure out how to do the work to move pretty close to the top. And so I needed a little bit more direction and guidance for that. And so I was trying to decide what I should do after writing Code Complete. So now the book had been out for about a year. It's about 1994. I'm about 9 years out of college, and I was looking for some career direction. And so I created something that I thought of as a professional reputation context diagram. I know that sounds like a terribly elaborate phrase, but at the time in software requirements and software design, there was a notion of something called a context diagram. So really I was just piggybacking off that notion of this software technique at the time of a context diagram. So the way that looked like was this, and this I have an actual date on the piece of paper. So I know I created this on October 23rd, 1994. And I realize this is kind of impossible to read, but the main point, or the biggest decision to be made here is right in the middle of the diagram, which is deciding, do I want to go in a software engineering direction or do I want to go in a computer science direction? And so that's kind of the big decision. And I knew I wanted to go in the software engineering direction. So to make that a little bit more readable, I felt like that circle, which is where I really wanted to get to, was a software engineering guru. So computer science obviously matters a lot, but I felt like software engineering was what I was interested in. And the guy who I thought was really at the top at the time was a guy named Ed Jordan. He had published a lot. He was very influential. He had written in a variety of different areas of software engineering. And I admired his work and thought, okay, that would be a great direction to move in. I thought there were a couple paths to get there. One was to be an expert in a single field within software engineering, so an expert in requirements or design or software construction, or even more detailed, like a specific aspect of design. In today's terms, maybe domain-driven design or something like that. And that unpacked on the other side as being more of a generalist, so not just locked into really deep specialization in one specific field, but having some expertise across a variety of software engineering fields. And then that, on the software engineering single field side, that breaks down in my mind into you could be an expert as a researcher, you could be an expert as a practitioner who is really well known as a high quality specialist practitioner. You could be a consultant, or you could be a writer. And of course, there are combinations of those that would also be possible. And then on the generalist side, it really broke down the same way. So in looking at what I had just done, which was finish code complete, I thought, okay, where does that put me? And I felt like that put me right there on the software engineering single field expert. And so I was trying to figure out what to do next. And the projects that I was thinking of were, number one, Design Complete. Design Complete would have been a very appropriate book for me to write after Code Complete. I had the background to be able to write the book. I thought it would have been identified with what I'd done for Code Complete. There wasn't really a book out there that would fit that. But what I felt with that book was that it would essentially give me the same credential I already had, which was it would just double down on that single field expertise. And so I decided not to do it for that reason. Another book that I was really interested in was a book that I was thinking of as Optimizing Windows Programs. I really like the topic of performance optimization, but again, I think that would have kind of doubled down on that same credential. And so the other book I was thinking about was Rapid Development, which rather than being a software construction or coding book was more of a project leadership or management book. And I felt like that put me over in this other bubble, in the software engineering generalist bubble. And so that's what I decided to do. I decided to write that book so that I wouldn't just keep establishing the same credential, but would have some chance of kind of triangulating in on the software engineering guru credential overall. So I did write Rapid Development, and that came out in 1996. And again, in writing this book, completing this book and having it published, I got some unexpected benefits. One is that I was invited into leadership positions within IEEE Software Magazine. I was also invited into leadership positions in the IEEE Professional Activities Board, which I mentioned at the beginning of my comments. And I think collectively, now I wasn't just getting a magazine and reading about this group of software professionals difference. I was actually part of it and in a leadership role in it. And collectively, that just added to my sense of purpose and added to the sense that I was in a position where I could try to make a difference and maybe actually could make a difference. I think the general learning here is significant, which is that as your career progresses, you've got a set of options in front of you and you choose from the options that are currently available. And I think of this as taking the next step up the mountain or the next step up a ladder. And the more steps you take up the mountain, the more you can see, the more you have awareness of. You can't see everything from the level you're at now, but as you continue to take steps, you see more. And as you take those steps, new options become available that you can't see initially, but that you can see as you take more steps up the mountain. And so this is a major life strategy for me, is that if I have two paths that I could go on, and one path is going to open up more options than the other path, then I like to choose the path that opens up more options. I don't have to take the options, but it's good to have options. And so if all other things being equal, if one path is going to create more opportunities potentially, then that's the path that I'll choose. And so I think that was kind of a big learning for me from the rapid development experience. Was I didn't have any of this on my radar screen when I wrote the book. I wasn't thinking that I would get invited to join this magazine or get on the editorial board or the advisory board, but these opportunities opened up and I could see them after I had taken the step of writing rapid development. So, all right, so that's some background on me. And I guess the question is, can anyone else use this approach to professional development? Is this something that you could use? And it turns out that other people have, in fact, approached their careers this way. I didn't know it at the time, but it turns out that they have. And so Fred Brooks, who you might know as the author of The Mythical Man Month, which for a long time was probably the most famous book in software engineering, I talked to one of his PhD students, a person you might also know, John Bentley. And John said that when he was a student of Fred Brooks, that Fred Brooks had him create essentially a career plan based on what, if I'm recalling correctly, he described as an 18th century Prussian scholarship model. And the way that model looks is something like this. You start out by publishing a paper in part of the area you want to be recognized for. And then you publish another paper in a different part of the area you want to be recognized for. And then you publish a third paper in yet another part of the area you want to be recognized for. And you keep doing this for a while. And eventually, after you've published all the papers that collectively make up the topic area you want to be known for, then you publish a book that covers all the papers that you've previously published. And at that point, you have a credential that allows you to become chair of your university department, and that allows you to become recognized as an expert, or possibly as the expert, the main expert in your field. And so this was a model that had been around for 200 or 300 years, and I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but in effect, that's what I was doing. And I think to modernize the term a little bit, I think what this amounts to is a form of lily pad hopping that adds up to something. It's more strategic. And in more modern terms, it might be something like publishing a paper that's in one part of an area you want to be recognized for. Then maybe it's publishing another paper or establishing a social media presence in that area. Maybe it's establishing more social media presence after that in a related area. And after a while, you get invited to speak at a conference. You publish another area. Maybe you get invited to, maybe you write a book. Pardon me. Maybe you get invited to join or lead a standards committee. You get invited to organize a conference, not just speak at it, organize panel discussions. And eventually, all this adds up, again, to being recognized as an expert, or possibly the expert in your field. And so I think this is 300 years later, this is still something that is very, very doable for someone who wants to plan out their career. All right, and so I think as we go through this structured lily pad hopping approach, you don't have to say yes to any of the options that open up, but the options are good. Maybe you say, well, who cares? I don't want to be on a standards committee. I don't really want to organize a conference. Well, fine, you don't have to, but it's nice to be invited. And, you know, maybe you should try it, and maybe you'd like it, and maybe that would open up more doors that you don't know about now. So again, I think options are good. And there are, of course, many other options other than the ones I'm describing here. All right, so now with this as background, I've got my personal story, and I've got this other structured technique that's been around for a really long time for career development. I'll describe my approach to supporting professional development for other software professionals, which really draws in elements from my personal experience and also from the approach that Fred Brooks was using with his PhD students. And this is called, this is a product my company offers called the Professional Development Ladder. And the version I'm going to talk about is version 4.0, which is a version that's been out for a couple years. And we're considering updating it, revising it, but I'll tell you about the version we have available now. So I think for most software professionals, I think their careers are a lot like mine was, which is they tend to hop from one project to another, from one technology to another, but the experience doesn't necessarily add up to anything. It's like the old saying, if someone's been working for 10 years, do they really have 10 years of experience, or do they have the same 1 year of experience 10 times? And really what we want is a way to guarantee that if you've been working for 10 years, you truly get 10 years of experience. So the Professional Development Ladder, or PDL, has a number of building blocks. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly and try to leave lots of time for questions. But it starts with knowledge areas, so identifying an organization or a taxonomy of the knowledge in the field of software development or software engineering. And then we have defined performance levels that define how good a person would be or how capable they would be in each knowledge area. We have a professional development matrix, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then professional development activities that help to develop a person so they can actually perform at the level expected at each of those defined performance levels. So the knowledge areas look more or less like you might think they would. They're based on the software engineering body of knowledge, so they're standards based. And it includes topic areas like construction, design, foundations, maintenance management, process quality, release management, requirements, testing. So more or less what you probably would expect comprehensive organization of the knowledge areas in software development to look like. The performance levels, I suppose, could be defined in a variety of ways. The way we define them is as introductory, competence, leadership, and mastery. And then we have specific ideas of what performance in each of these areas looks like. And when we put these together, we get this thing that we call a professional development matrix. And so when we cross the knowledge areas with the performance levels, what we find is that we get this amazing structure that helps to guide and support career development that is simultaneously really structured, but also really flexible. And so the professional development matrix looks like this, where we've got the knowledge areas across the top, and you can see construction, design, foundations, and so on. We've got the performance levels down the side, introductory, competence, and leadership. And then, so we've got the knowledge areas, we call them KAs sometimes, as I said. We've got the performance levels. And then inside each of these cells, so inside each cell where we've got, say, design at the leadership level, we've got a set of professional development activities that are designed to build performance up to that level. I'll talk about those details in a moment. And collectively, when we take all of this and we add it up, we can build career paths that can end up supporting both long-term and short-term, provide short-term and long-term guidance to develop toward being one of the roles that somebody might want to be: a software architect, an agile coach, a technical manager, quality manager, and so on. Remember, one of my learnings from writing Code Complete was that I felt like I had learned about as much in writing the 1 year I spent writing the book as I learned in any 3 years I spent actually doing hands-on work. And my eventual learning was that it was the back and forth that was really valuable. It wasn't that the writing was more valuable or that the hands-on experience was more valuable. It was the combination that was especially valuable. And so that concept is really built into our PDL. And what we feel is that real career development and development of improved performance is supported by 4 kinds of activities. One is notional learning or reading. One is hands-on learning or training. One is definitely real-world experience, but real-world experience organized in a way that exposes professionals to the kinds of activities they need in order to continue being stretched and advanced, not just doing the same thing over and over again. And then reflection, a really important element, typically or ideally guided by a manager or mentor, so that you extract every bit of learning out of your experiences, out of your reading, and out of your training with someone who knows you and knows your skills and knows where you can benefit from further development. So if we go back to our professional development matrix, we actually subdivide each column into a knowledge component and an experience component, because both of those matter. You can't have, it's not that one is more important than the other, it's that you really have to have both to get to an indicated level of performance. And so just to give you an example, this is a pretty low level example. This is at the introductory level in the management knowledge area. And so you can see we've got a pretty light reading requirement at this level. We've got also a training requirement, and then we've got a whole lot of experience requirements. And so the reason I show you this is just to indicate that the experience is a pretty big deal. It's not just handing somebody a stack of books and saying, here, read these and you'll be terrific. It's got to involve the books, sure, but it's also got to involve the experience and then the back and forth. So we try to provide some structure to the individuals by having individuals create a professional development plan. And that really outlines what a person where a person is now, so their current state, what they want to do in the short term and what they want to accomplish in the short term. And I think long-term goals without short-term goals typically don't work very well, but it also includes midterm goals and long-term goals. So long-term goals give you general direction, short-term goals tell you what you're actually going to do. And the professional development matrix, going back to that, provides structure and support for the professional development plan. So we can organize where a person is now, as shown by the green areas. That's where a person already has achieved that level of knowledge and experience. The yellow levels indicate what the person's midterm or planned development path is, and then the black dots indicate what their near-term development focus is going to be. And so at a very quick glance, we can see where someone is, where they want to go long-term and where they want to go in the short term, and we get a pretty comprehensive view of what somebody wants to do. And the person themselves actually gets a comprehensive view of what they want to do. Agile has introduced the idea of information radiators. This is essentially an information radiator for a person's career development. All right, so what's the benefit of structuring knowledge areas this way? I think it ends up providing a structure that supports this strategic lily pad hopping that I've been talking about. So in this variant on the lily pad hopping, maybe you get to competence performance in knowledge area number 1, and then you move to leadership performance in knowledge area number 1. After that, maybe move to competence performance in knowledge area number 2. Maybe you then move to competence performance in knowledge area number 3. And then leadership performance in knowledge area number 2, and so on and so on. And over time, what this adds up to is a highly competent software professional, where the experiences that you're having, the reading that you're doing, adds up to something. It's not it's not the same year of experience 10 times. It's truly 10 years of experience. And I think if it's done well, compared to how much real experience a person gets over 10 years, it can be more like getting 20 years of experience in a 10-year time frame, because you're actually extracting every bit of value that you can out of the experience that you're having. Now, to put a little bit more of a less of a lily pad hopping view, but more of maybe a professional view on this, what this could look like more is at level 1, we could have someone who becomes a developer or tester. At level 2, they become a senior developer, maybe Scrum Master. This starts to look a little bit like a path. And so level 3, maybe they become a technical lead. Level 4, maybe they're moving in a design direction, so they become an associate architect. Level 5, maybe they become a software architect. Now, this could be, this could be 5 to 10 year progression, but what this starts to look like is a career path for a software architect. And we can put together other kinds of career paths for technical manager, for agile roles like an agile technical coach, for software quality manager, for product owner. And really, the possibilities here are almost limitless in the number of different ways we can exercise the professional development matrix to provide structure for different kinds of career paths and career plans that support a wide variety of disciplines in the field of software development. So I suppose we're at a point where we can wrap up and draw some conclusions. I would say that my learnings look like this. Number 1, I think it's really useful to set a personal vision. It doesn't mean that you have to slavishly follow it, but it does give you direction. It helps you make decisions on a day-by-day basis, month-by-month basis, just as it would for product development. I think it's useful to self-assess current performance, both in terms of knowledge and experience. And really, that's what I was doing with my professional reputation pyramid, was self-assessing. Where am I, candidly, and how does that relate to where I might like to be in the future? I think it's useful to map out a long-term path that's based on improving your own performance in your selected areas, and then to make short-term plans that help you acquire both the knowledge and the experience to advance you along your long-term path. And I think it's important to understand this is not something where you say, okay, I'm going to spend 1 week a year in a really intensive development mode, and that's going to help. It probably is not going to help. Doing a little bit each week or each month is really what's going to help. I think we're at a state in the industry today where most people get most of their learning from reading fragmented articles on the internet or watching videos. And I think that book-length knowledge is still useful. Getting a coherent, organized understanding of an area is something that's worth doing. And it doesn't take any longer to read a few pages in a book than it does to read something on an article on the internet. But I think it adds up to something. Now, of course, there's stuff on the internet where if you like an individual writer or a person doing videos, then maybe you do get a coherent view over time. But I think there's the key point here is exposing yourself to coherent, larger organizations of knowledge. And I think that means investing in yourself a little bit each week or each month and having that add up over time. I'd like to close today with this thought from William James, who's the founder of psychology in American psychology, and also was one of the key people in the American philosophy. And he made the comment that a person who keeps faithfully busy each hour of the working day can count on waking up some fine morning to realize they become one of the competent ones of their generation. I think that really says it all. It's not about a big push once a year. It's about steady progress over time. So thank you for your attention today, and I'll be happy to open the floor to any questions if we have any.
What a fantastic talk, Steve, and how appropriate you bring up William James. Earlier, we had a speaker talking about pragmatism, and William James is the founder of pragmatism. So
yeah, great.
Really wrapped it all up. We do have a couple of questions for you. The first one here is, I'm 35 years old. Isn't it too late to create a plan?
That question makes me sad. If you think your career is basically over at 35, I don't know what your life plans are, but
early retirement.
Very, very early retirement. No, 35 is definitely not too old. I think you could easily be working for easily, if you're only 35 now, your life expectancy is probably 125 or something with all the medical advances. So yeah, you could be working for 30, 40, 50 more years. I think you got plenty of time. So, but I would take the learning and say, okay, if this is the first time you're thinking about this at that point in your career, what does that say about maybe needing some structure or some support for career development? And the likelihood is, if somebody's 35 and has been working in the field for, that would make it about maybe 10 to 15 years. The likelihood is you have accumulated a lot of relevant experience. And so I would go through and really write down what experiences you've had, what technologies you've had, what techniques you've been exposed to, and try to figure out, well, okay, it's going to be a little bit of a connect the dots kind of a picture, but what do you already have? And I would guess if you went through and added it up, you probably got more than you think you do. I think one of the really interesting things about software and technology evolutions is that technologies and practices come and go, and different techniques also come and go and then come back again. And a lot of that is based on where we are in the current technology wave. And I think for somebody who is 35 and has been working in the field for, say, almost 15 years, the likelihood is that you've already used techniques that were useful 10 or 12 years ago that you have stopped using because they weren't useful for a while given the maturity of the technology you were working in, but that may in fact be useful again because now you're back to a maturity level in a technology wave that you were in 10 or 12 years ago. So I would say go through, make a list, add it up, see where you are, and then see what kind of dots you need to add to make a coherent picture.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Steve. We've got another question from Igor. In these stressful times, many people feel burnt out and stop developing. What's your recipe for overcoming that?
Well, yeah, I think that's a tough question. Certainly identify with the idea of feeling burnout and so on. I guess I'll give you kind of a two-part answer on this one. I think this shift to working from home for a lot of people has been an interesting one. And it's one that I went through early in my career because I took a year off to write Code Complete. I worked from home that whole time. I kind of got a taste for what working from home looked like a really long time ago. And then I did the same thing when I wrote Rapid Development, which was another year off to write a book. And so I kind of feel like the whole world over the last couple of years has learned some lessons that I learned early in my career because I did work from home with not a whole lot of human contact. I think going out of your way to get social contact is really important. People don't get it through their day-to-day interactions, and interacting solely on Zoom or Teams is okay, but it's not good enough. I think 3D in real life is great, and so push yourself a little bit to get out and do some of that. I think that that's important. And then I think the other thing that's important is that uh, uh, I don't remember exactly how the question was phrased, but my feeling there was kind of a stagnation feeling. And what I've talked about today is really all about personal growth. And so I think one way to get away from that feeling of being stagnated is to invest in yourself and experience some personal growth. And I think this is one of those things where if you try it a little bit, you might be surprised at how much of a difference it can make in how you feel. I think there's benefit in you get direct benefit of learning stuff that helps you do your job better, but I think you get indirect benefit from the feeling that I'm worthy and I'm worth investing in, and I did something I wasn't sure I was going to do, and I feel better because I did it. It's kind of like exercise, but it's not exercise for your body, it's exercise for your mind and your career.
Absolutely. And I think that you definitely hit the nail on the head with the feeling of stagnation there. So we've got a couple more questions here. Have you ever suffered from imposter syndrome?
That's pretty funny. I kind of feel like an awful lot of software developers suffer from imposter syndrome. It's actually funny because I think two things. I think a lot of people hold two thoughts simultaneously, which are totally contradictory. But one is imposter syndrome, and the other is a secret belief that I might really be the best programmer in the world. And and I think programming is funny that way because there's just so much detail that no one person can know all of. And so you're constantly running into things that you feel like you should have known and didn't. And so that I think contributes to the imposter syndrome. And there are always people who know all kinds of things you don't know. And so that contributes to the imposter syndrome. At the same time, the whole activity is about a steady stream of problem solving where you encounter little tiny puzzles and you solve puzzles, and sometimes they're not so little and tiny, sometimes they're big puzzles and you solve puzzles, and that leads you to feel like, hey, I'm really good at this, I'm actually really good at solving problems. And so I think people end up being kind of a split personality where they think both, I'm not really sure that I'm that good, and also simultaneously maybe I'm really really good. I think this One of the things I don't like seeing in software people, which I see from time to time, is people not admitting what they don't know. And I think it's an occupational hazard because we get paid for expertise, we get advanced for expertise. Expertise is our stock in trade. And so I think there's a fair amount of ego exposure when you have to admit, I don't know. But in my experience, admitting you don't know is never easier if you delay. It's more embarrassing to admit it after you've acted like you know than if you just admit it right away. And so as a matter of personal discipline, I have found it's terrifically useful to be the person that raises your hand and says, hey, what is that? That's new to me. And what I have found personally is that if you do that in a room full of people, then 3/4 of the rest of the people will go, yeah, I'm not quite sure what that is either. And so they're always glad that you're the one who is willing to stick your neck out and admit that you didn't know something. So I would say, imposter syndrome is kind of a psychological point, but I would avoid being a true imposter where you pretend you know something that you don't. And I think by avoiding being a true imposter, that will help to avoid the imposter syndrome.
Definitely. As a Scrum Master myself, I think part of the value of the Scrum values of courage and openness is that exact kind of creating that culture where you can have that vulnerability of saying, I don't know this thing.
Yeah, nobody knows everything. There's too much to know everything. And even individual technology stacks anymore have become so elaborate. Nobody knows everything about the individual technology stack. So, much less all the others. So yeah, I think just being willing to raise your hand. A lot of this goes back to how do you accelerate your pace of learning? And if you raise your hand, so there's a book called Elements of Style by Strunk and White, which in the U.S. nearly everybody reads in high school or college. And they have a section in that book that I've used as a guide for my whole life, which is they say, if you don't know how to pronounce a word, say it loudly. And they say most people kind of mumble if they don't know how to pronounce a word, but they say it loudly, someone will correct you and you'll learn something. And I think that's a way to accelerate learning. Likewise, if you don't know, don't sit in a meeting and pretend that you know, ask. Say that you don't know. Somebody will explain it to you. You'll give them an opportunity to understand it better, because explaining something is a good way to improve your understanding of it, and you'll learn something too. So, you're actually engaging in virtuous behavior for yourself and others when you say, I don't know, and you learn faster. So I think that's a good takeaway in terms of professional development.
Absolutely. We got a couple more questions here. Do you see a difference in software engineering career path versus the big data engineering career path?
So definitely, and I think the field of software engineering is not necessarily one that a lot of people have gotten a lot of exposure to. But that said, it's a pretty well-defined field at this point. It's not to say it's 100% stable, but it's pretty well-defined. So I think the path that you need to, or the steps that you need to take to move along the path in software engineering, I think can be mapped out in a way that you could work for 2 or 3 or 4 years along a path and expect it not to change a huge amount. I mean, yeah, there could be a new technology emerges and you move into that technology, but the concepts and principles and so on are going to be largely persistent. Not 100%, but largely stable over a 5-year horizon for sure. Data science, I think, is a completely different animal. I think it's too new, or it's newer, and so I think there's less stability there. I think it's less obvious exactly how you would map out a career path. But I would say for somebody who wants to take some initiative, that's actually opportunity. Because if the paths aren't well defined, that means an awful lot of people are just going to look at it and say, I don't know what the path looks like. I give up. I'll just kind of do my job and forget about it. But for somebody who's willing to take some initiative and blaze the trail, that would be something where I think that you could make pretty rapid progress. So it's kind of, software engineering path might be a little bit more of a lower risk, but potentially lower reward. Data science, I think, could be a little bit higher risk, but potentially higher reward.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. And one last question. What was the role of friends and family in your professional journey?
I think the role of friends and family was significant. When I wrote my first book, one of the things I did was I relied on my friends to do peer reviews of the outlines that I was working on, the concept, and then when I got some sample chapters, to give me review comments on the sample chapters. I am an enormous believer in the value of peer review. And I always said that between the time I came up with the idea for Code Complete and the time I submitted the proposal to the publisher, I think the book was at least twice as good because of the review comments that I got from friends. And then between when I submitted the proposal to the publisher and when it actually came out, I think it got twice as good again because of the peer review that occurred over the course of the manuscript development. So yeah, so I think that's good. And then of course, just general support. I was writing Code Complete at a pretty young age. I was in my late 20s at the time. And at that age anyway, when you say you're writing a book, everybody wants to talk to you about, oh, you're writing a book. How could you imagine that you could possibly write a book? And so there's a lot of just indirect support in terms of enthusiasm and motivation because of the interest that would create. And writing a book is the first time anyway, I think is a large unstructured activity, and it definitely benefits from lots and lots of support. It's in my experience anyway, the second and third ones were much easier, but the first one is one where you really have to create something out of nothing. You're creating order out of chaos, and nobody's organizing your time for you. Nobody's putting you on a schedule. It really is just kind of a uncharted territory. And so the learning experience of learning how to chart that territory, how to manage yourself, all of that's good learning, but and certainly easier if you've got some friends and family to support that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Steve, for such a wonderful talk and for the great Q&A session. We really appreciate you being here. We have one more talk as part of EngX Day. Up next will be the 3 architectures, 2 surprises, 1 mission with Vaughn and Marta. So please be sure to jump over and check that out and leave us a rating for Steve's wonderful talk, all 5 stars, I'm sure. And thank you very much.
Right. Thank you. Have a good rest of the conference.
Thanks, Steve.